Okay. I'm happy to just keep going. I'm happy to stop. I defer to
Why
other
don't you
board
roll for a
members.
little while
Okay.
and then we'll let
Just
you
cut me off when you want. Okay, so another question I have on the scenarios, I'm unclear if they're adding money back in to get us back to the 10% reserve that we are trying to be at. Is that reserve issue addressed in any of the information that's been presented?
So this year we were currently within the board parameter to not engage in establishing funds for replacing the ending fund balance. We are projecting that next year we will be in a position where we have to. Wasn't provided, we weren't at the 9% threshold. This year, you'll see in the budget presentation later or earlier, or when we decide to do that, that we have, will be at under $4 million of, around $4 million of ending fund balance, and therefore by board policy, the board will have to come up with a plan, or will provide you with a plan to restore that. It is not reflected in the current scenarios for our budget plan.
Okay, so the four scenarios do not address the fact that we are significantly under our requirements.
And we know that we'll have to budget that next year, so that's something we can keep in mind when we're making decisions this evening, is next year, in order to restore what will essentially be a $9 million ending fund balance, and we have 4, we're going to have to come up with a plan to restore 2.5 per year of that ending fund balance on top of the work we're doing today.
Right, okay.
How about if we let some other folks jump in? I've got Matt. Anybody else in the queue? Susie, are you want to be in the queue? If you responded, Susie.
Yes, I'll holler in.
Okay, all right.
I'm confused at the moment, trying to figure out what you're looking at, but.
Okay. Matt.
I want to start off by thanking colleagues and faculty and students and staff who have been regularly communicating with lawmakers, and in particular those who were lobbying in person with us at our days of action. We were united in our requests for fair and equitable funding, ideally somewhere toward the quality education model level. We are asking, there's a united front in which we're asking for $787 million distributed among Oregon's 17 community colleges. We're nowhere near that right now, but in our most recent lobby visits, there's talk of various tax reform initiatives. There's, between now and the end of June, there's some potential for some movement. And so no one in that room, I can say pretty clearly, had an appetite, no one had an appetite for raising tuition or cutting programs. You know, it's a comprehensive community college providing a wide breadth of programs for a wide array of community members at an affordable price that's still significantly south of what it costs to earn a degree at the University of Oregon. I would ask, Mr. Vice President, if we ever can look at, or if we can have a goal of rolling back tuition if our lawmakers were to budget accordingly and appropriately. If let's say there's a nominal tuition increase, and I'm assuming that a $6 of the 3 proposals in front of us, one's at an $11 level, one's at a $38 level, and one's at a $6 level. I'm assuming the $6 pretty close to a cost per living increase if the board had passed a higher education price index. That the $6 kind of in that range. But if there is a difference, let's say it's a $4 or $5 cost of living increase and the $6 represents $1 or $2 above, is there any way, and I think I know the answer to this, that we can that we roll back that tuition increase if we're fairly funded by our lawmakers in Salem?
And I'll just add one thing to that. As we participated in the conversations with the lawmakers, one of the things that they made clear is that they don't expect to have final numbers until very close to the end of session. So we could very well end up with, we just won't know until June or July.
And as you can see on the screen, every half percent change in lanes allocation would be an additional $1.4 million. Every $10 million change in the community college support fund is about $400,000. So if we were to see more money and make a tuition decision, we would have the ability to revisit that.
So to be really clear, and I guess I would defer to you to speak on behalf of the administration, that administration would be okay with the caveat that should we be fairly funded, we could actually roll back that cost burden.
And I would say, in fairness to students, we would have to be very explicit in what fairly funded meant,
Right.
and be very clear. I think the best gift that the board can give the Budget Development Subcommittee, the administration, and the students is clear guidance on what their tuition will be for fall of 2020.
Great. Thank you.
Rosie?
So my question is about process. There's no motion on the floor. What are we discussing here?
Brian has placed the recommendation of the administration before us. There has not been a motion made, but we are raising questions about his, trying to get clarity. And I know Melody has more questions. I see Lisa's hand up.
Did your question get answered?
Hmm?
Brian, I didn't feel like I got an answer to Matt's question. Like, I heard you say that the budget subcommittee needs clear direction, but if we were to get additional funding from the state, what would the process look like to roll back the tuition? If we agreed tonight to increase tuition to approve what you're asking us to do, then what would it look like for us to roll it back? And I don't just mean the decision at the board level, because I'm assuming we'd have to make another decision. Like, what does it look like within the college infrastructure itself?
So some complexity is involved in when students start to register and when students start to pay. We'll have to set those tuition rates in order for them to be applicable for students registering for summer and fall. The clock is ticking on that. When we look at the anticipated timeline of the legislators to make this decision, that decision will pass the time that we'll have to set tuition rates. So at that time, the decision would be, now we could make a decision to lower tuition in the future. We could lower tuition in the next budget cycle. We could raise tuition less than we might have in the next budget cycle. But a lot of this is contingent on our registration dates, posting our posted tuition rates for summer and fall, and knowing that we might have a decision from Salem that could come as late as June.
When do we, can I ask?
Yeah, go right ahead.
When do we post tuition rates for the summer?
We register the first week in May.
So we're registering the first week of May.
So is it conceivable that we could lower rates the start of winter term for winter term?
It is conceivable, but it's not an easy function for the college, for those who award financial aid, for students who are trying to figure out their budget. So it's not without not impossible, but with great complexity.
Okay, I've got some clarification.
I was just going to add that it's very likely that if any new revenue package passes the legislature, they're talking right now about referring it themselves to the voters. And so new revenue won't materialize until it would go before the voters, which could be as late as January 2020. So I think, you prepare yourself that if there is an influx of additional funding, it may not come to us until year 2. So the rollback of tuition could be in year 2.
Thank you.
But
I had Phil next.
So it's a little bit along the line of what Lisa asked. What does the process look like in terms of when you think whether something's adequately funded or not, right? If we get a favorable number, what does that process look like as well? What's the turnaround on you getting back to us and saying, hey, we are adequately funded, or how long would that take for us to know?
We are currently facing an $8 million deficit as we look to balance our budget. To the Community College Support Fund, in order to be able to do everything we're doing today, has estimated that it'd be $646 million to continue on at current service levels. We are balancing the budget at the 590 level, $56 million shy of what we need to do the exact same thing. Lane's allocation will change in support here based on that projection and based on that final number. At that point, we'll have to decide, in order to have strategic investments, keep the programs and services we want to keep, it'll be a balance. So there's a balanced approach to that question. We are currently not receiving the funding levels we need to continue to do what we do today.
So, go ahead, Phil.
Just, I want to add a thought, really. It's, it sounds like we're trying to be very hopeful here. I mean, I know that we've talked about it quite a bit about rolling back, and man, I'd love to see that soon, but thanks, Brett, for the clarification. I think we're being very hopeful here, and I would like for us to also, start narrowing our discussion down to how we feel and where we feel we're at. Whether we're talking about a tuition freeze or cost price index, let's talk about that.
Okay. I would like to ask for one point of clarification. Brian, I've heard the number 646, and when we were working with OCCA in Salem, the number then was 647. Can you add any clarification to that? Which is the real number?
Yeah.
787 total.
But it was, the 647 was?
Seven, yes.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, so do you want to ask a couple more questions, and then we can go toward a motion, or are we ready for a motion right now?
I am in no way ready for a motion.
Well, why don't you ask a couple more questions?
Okay. If we could we talk about the scenarios themselves? I personally am obviously taking scenario 2 and scenario 3 off the table. In my mind, we're talking about scenario 1 and 4. So we're talking about the 0% tuition increase or the 5.3% increase of the $6. There's some things in the scenarios that I'm confused on for kind of why the choices were made and some of the information that's in them. So to start, I see that scenario 1 still includes maintaining internal bookstore and food services, but scenario 4 does not. So that's an additional $1.1 million that's feeding into scenario 4 that's not feeding into scenario 1. Can you explain to me why that choice was made to include maintaining that in scenario 1, but exclude it from scenario 4? Yeah.
The scenarios give a variety of approaches to a balanced budget. There has been some talk about absorbing the entrepreneurial areas out of our entrepreneurial fund 6 into the general fund and treating them as a service. There's an associated cost with that. Giving you alternate scenarios where a few maintain it and a few have a redesigned approach gives you the budgetary impact, which is that $1.1 million number.
Well, actually, 3 of them maintain it. Only 1 of them gets rid of it. So only scenario 4 takes out internal bookstore and food services. The other 3 maintain it in there.
You are correct.
Okay. In scenario 4, fees are higher by $75,000 in additional revenue over scenario 1. I don't understand that difference.
The fees are higher in
Scenario 4, like $75,000.
75.
If we increase tuition, the policy is that differential fees are increased by a commensurate percentage increase. So you'll see that in 2 and 4.
Okay, thank you. I'm clear about that. Okay, so I made this note last night, and I don't even remember what it is. It said includes ESI. What is ESI? What was that?
Early separation and stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew it made sense. Is that incorporated into any of these scenarios as well, the savings that are coming from the ESI?
The current projection does not.
Okay, so that would be, I forget the numbers, they're jumbled right now, but that would still be then additional dollars that would flow into either scenario 1 or scenario 4. The strategic implications that are outlined in scenario 1 were not, I had sent an email around the other day where I had really wanted to see some kind of concrete analysis on the impact on our strategic priorities. This is very general in the statements that are made, just talking about it will have an impact. Some, investments will be rolled back. I don't have a concrete understanding if we froze tuition versus if we increased tuition by $6. Have we done any sensitivity analysis to understand what impact it might have on enrollment? Any analysis to truly understand if we have to roll back investments in student success, exactly what those investments are that we would